To Saint Augustine, the very idea of a devil was impossible. He explained why in Book 7 of his Confessions. In order to exist at all, that is, in order to be, a thing must have some minimal degree of unity and order and consistency. And yet, unity, order, and consistency are divine attributes. God just is those things taken together as an entity, according to Augustinian theology. So, in order for something to be utterly devoid of God, in order for it to be completely godless, it would have to be missing the very things that you need in order to be at all. So a devil could not exist. And yet, early in that very same book, St. Augustine reminisces about and obsesses over the capacity that children have for doing evil. He remembers stealing some pears as a child, and he thinks about how horrific it was that, as a child, he chose to steal those pears simply because it was evil to do so. So we have an interesting pair of ideas. On one hand, evil cannot be an entity like a devil. Instead, it has to be a feature of children? Well, we're going to appeal to these two themes together of evil devils and child rearing in today's adventure. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to go to the Ravenloft Domain of Dread called Invidia, a place that is thematized around devil worship and contacting spirits, but also about evil children, or at least one child, Malocchio Adair, the son of the Dark Lord Gabriel Adair. And what we have here is something of a Omen, Rosemary's Baby sort of situation, and we'll talk about that in time. As always, with my Ravenloft videos, we're going to go over what this domain is, list some media that'll help us get an imaginative grip on the domain, and then sketch out an adventure. Today's adventure proceeds across 3 acts, and it'll take PCs from level 6 up through level 8. That is, PCs will complete the adventure at level 8, and once they're done, they could level up to 9 with DM's permission. This adventure takes elements from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, keys from the Golden Vault, and MCDM's book Where Evil Lives, the book full of boss monster layers. Before we get started with any of that, though, what is the domain of Invidia? Well, Gabriel Adair is convinced that her son Malocchio is destined for greatness. From her estate outside the village of Carina, she employs an endless string of servants to provide Malocchio the very best possible upbringing. Inevitably, though, every servant flees or vanishes, either as a result of Gabriel's unreasonable expectations or the deadly tricks and accidents that frequently occur around the child. Gabrielle isn't content to leave her son's grand destiny to chance, though. Using her precious bone spirit board, she calls upon supernatural forces to guide and protect her son. Spirits, angels, fiends, and worse answer her summons. But as long as they chart Malocchio's path to glory, Gabrielle eagerly accepts their gifts. Okay, so Invidia is a domain of dread that is basically ruled by the worst PTA member ever. I jest, but it's a domain whose Dark Lord is trying to raise the Antichrist, or something like it. Gabrielle has this child, Malocchio, and she's constantly conjuring devils and demonic spirits and other evil entities to help empower him and train him and give him weapons and things to fight with and conquer with. And in addition to this, the child's malevolence seems to infect the very process, so that I imagine human servants around Gabriel Adair's mansion are always dying under mysterious or less than mysterious circumstances. It makes me think of the child in The Omen, and speaking of which, let's review some media that'll help us get an imaginative grip on this domain. Now, there's no shortage of horror films and horror short stories and literature that are about devils and demon summoning and about evil children who are either the products of a union with a devil or else inspired by a devil. So we're just going to stick to a few that'll help inform our adventure and what I think the general feel of the domain should be. If you have any other ideas or any sources that are important that you think I really skipped over, let me know what they are in the comments. My first selection is actually the 1968 film written by Richard Matheson, The Devil Rides Out, This one features Christopher Lee, and it was also directed by Terence Fisher. And in addition to being a fun tale of supernatural horror and intrigue, it features a climactic scene that I'd like to borrow from. A scene in which the protagonists are trapped in a magic circle, illuminated in an expanse of darkness, and they're constantly tempted and taunted and harangued and threatened by apparitions and other illusory spells that are summoned by their satanic adversary. We're gonna take from that. More predictably, of course, you'll have to look at the 1976 film The Omens, starring Gregory Peck. Written by David Seltzer and directed by Richard Donner, it has a really excellent soundtrack by Jerry Goldsmith that's super spooky. You might even want to borrow it for scoring your Invidia adventure. And I often imagine Malocchio as being something like Damien from The Omen. He's a child whose very presence is ominous and who has some kind of connection to the occult and the devilish and the supernatural, but it's not clear exactly what. It's not like he's an X-Men, like Iceman, who has a specific power or something. You also have all the deaths around Damien, which I think are supposed to be like the deaths that occur around Malocchio. And our adventure is going to begin with a similar sort of death to the one that occurs at the beginning of The Omen. I also, of course, recommend the 1987 film Hellraiser. Written and directed by Clive Barker, it not only has a really excellent mythology of these hellish Cenobites, it also has a wonderful plot device, the puzzle box that opens a gateway. We're going to borrow heavily from this when it comes to Gabriel Adair's Spirit Board. Indeed, it'll serve a similarly pivotal role in the adventure. There's also the 1992 film Sleepwalkers, written by Stephen King and directed by Mick Garris. I put this one on the list because sometimes when I think about Invidia, I imagine that it would be fruitful to pose Gabrielle and her son as being like a weird, creepy, almost incestuous, villainous duo. And I think in particular about the creatures in this film. Monsters, after all, are created from the stuff of cultural taboos, incest being one of those taboos. And so depending on how old Malocchio is exactly in your campaign, you might want to take a look at this film for some inspiration as to their characters. Now, in terms of really cool recent horror literature that deals with the setting of hell or the topic of hell, there's Nicole Cushing's short story, The Orchard of Hanging Trees from 2012, which appears in her 2015 collection, The Mirrors. This is a very cool short story that takes place in hell, and our point of view character is a demon who has a rather wretched job in a particularly wretched location in hell. Despite its fantastical setting, the horror still manages to be really deep and existential, as is frequent in Nicole Cushing stories. And so I heavily recommend that one. There's also the 2016 short story Feed the Pig by Elias Withrow. This is a short piece originally published online, but then lengthened to a full novel, I think. And it's just a brief, horrifying exposure to what hell could be like. I really love it. And speaking of such exposures, there's also the 2019 collection by Nathan Ballingrud, Wounds, a collection which features several stories about hell or things from hell or events on the border of hell. So far, I've only read a couple of these, the first two, the Atlas of Hell and the Diabolist, but they're both excellent, and I've also read enough Nathan Ballingrud to know that the whole collection is probably very, 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 very good. So check out those stories and draw from them as well. I also like the David Warren short story, A Dark Quadrivium, from the 2022 anthology Howls from the Dark Ages. It's a fun, diabolical tale about a man who's working for an Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
Yes, that Inquisition. And in the course of his duties, he's supposed to translate a heretical text and discovers a horrifying truth. If you like short stories about evil books or forbidden books or evil tomes that corrupt the mind of the reader or who have some kind of ruinous, ponderous truth inside, you should check out this short story. It's cool. And in terms of original material from the second edition Ravenloft setting, there's the 1995 adventure, The Evil Eye. Written by Steve Kurtz, it is kind of a tour of the entire domain of Invidia, as well as an introduction to several important characters like Nathan Timothy. It's a neat adventure, and one that we're not going to try to rewrite or recapitulate in our own, but definitely worth looking over if you want to know more about the lore of Invidia. And finally, I also recommend Tewin Woodruff's second edition Ravenloft piece, Van Richten's Guide to Fiends, which has a lot of interesting material, both lore-based as well as just flavorful, about how devils and demons might interact with the dark powers of Ravenloft and how you can use them in a particularly gothic way, so that your devils feel a little bit more like the devils of horror cinema and less like the devils of high fantasy. Alright, with that out of the way, let's sketch out this adventure. In Act 1, at level 6, the PCs emerge from the mists to find themselves in Invidia and are quickly summoned to celebrate Malocchio's birthday at a lavish party. In Act 2, at level 7, after witnessing, enduring, and battling some horrific things at the birthday party, the PCs are summoned to meet the birthday boy, where they are summarily banished to part of Hell, or a region on the border of Hell and Invidia. Then, in Act 3, at level 8, having escaped the border of Hell with a hellish artifact, the PCs must infiltrate Gabrielle Adair's mansion, find her spirit board, and use it against the Dark Lord. So let's get started. So in Act 1, at level 6, PCs emerge from the mists of Ravenloft to find themselves in the city of Carina, in the land of Invidia. Carina is a 19th century Gothic setting, so pull out your peaked roofs and your antediluvian gables, your cobblestoned streets and your horse-drawn carriages, your top hats and your mantled cloaks, your gas lamps and fancy candelabras. It just so happens, as the PCs emerge from the mists, that the town guards are gathering people and hoarding them together to celebrate the birthday of Malocchio Adair. Who's Malocchio? Why do we have to go? And other questions might escape your PC's lips at this moment. And here you should make it seem like national custom. More of a reminder than anything coerced. True, a lot of people don't seem exactly thrilled to go, and a lot of people seem nervous or afraid, too. But today is the 16th birthday of Malocchio Adair, the son of Gabrielle Adair, the Duchess who rules this land. Now, if for some reason your PCs don't want to take the hook, don't worry. You can draw out the celebration of Malocchio's birthday for as long as you want. You could be celebrating his birthday for an entire month or for an entire year, but hopefully your PCs will take the adventure hook and go to witness Malocchio's birthday. If so, or when so, they are led to an enormous, sprawling mansion which has a separate outdoor wing that has been recently constructed for festivities. This new area is labeled the Pleasure Atrium, and it's a central performance area open to the sky, an open floor, which has some tables and chairs at the edges for an audience to sit, but which also has elevated boxed seating, and the most elevated box features Gabrielle Adair and her leering son. Now for a map of this place, I would use the Notorious Nightclub from page 150 of the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. You should describe the caged performers as wearing jester-like costumes of red and black, and you should borrow from the imagery of the cult of Rakdos when you're describing them too. I'm sure they're fire swallowers and fire breathers and sword swallowers and sword breathers and whatever other acrobatic nonsense you can imagine. It should be very decadent and have a devilish theme to it, but there's nothing overtly monstrous. These are still human beings. On that topic, in fact, I would say that this performance is not child-friendly. It should strike the PCs as weird and even horrifying that this sort of display would be for some kid's 16th birthday. But speaking of that birthday boy, he's enjoying it immensely. He's clapping and pointing and asking the performers to do even more perverse things and weird things.
He's into it. Go ahead.
Do a double backflip and so on.
Play with her ass.
The PCs are taken to the floor seating along with a bunch of other nobles who have tables and chairs that they're seated at. Now, amid the devilish festivities, it could be fun to imitate that scene from the beginning of The Omen. You know, the one where the caretaker hangs herself and says, "I did it all for you, Damien." Blah. You could do that. That would be really fun. You could have some caretaker that's like, "Malocchio, I did it all for you," and a similar thing. Could be a fun shout out, or it could be distracting. Feel it out at your table. But a similar thing is bound to happen, which is all of a sudden, a hellhound-like monster bursts into the area, maybe falling from the sky or else bursting through a wall or a door, and it starts attacking the performers and audience alike. There's bloodshed, there's chaos, there's screaming, everyone's panicking, and Malocchio and his mom, Gabrielle, from the boxed seat above are clapping and really enjoying it now. In particular, Malocchio turns to his mom and asks whether the monster is his birthday present, and she smiles at him. But the PCs are right next to the thing, and there are innocent victims getting mauled, begging with the PCs for protection. So it's boss fight time. Start with a Category 2 Crassis from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and give it maximum hit points and 3 uses of legendary resistance. Also give it 3 legendary actions that can be spent making an attack, moving without provoking an attack of opportunity, or taking the dodge action, and stipulate that you can't do the same one of those any 2 times in a row. And I would also allow it to spend 2 legendary actions to summon 1d4 imps, which uncurl from a cloud of fireballs that it exhales. Those imps fight along the monster. I would also make sure to describe the monster as looking like some kind of hellhound, a beast that is engulfed in flame and exhales clouds of flame. I would make it lupine, but, be creative. And once the PCs defeat it, it falls unconscious. The crowd is relieved, they thank the PCs, but the hosts are livid. Gabriel angrily announces the end of all festivities and dismisses the crowd, and Malocchio starts tantruming that his birthday is ruined. Meanwhile, servants rush out to retrieve the monster's body on a stretcher, as some other servants approach the PCs, thanking them, but also asking, with guard enforcement, to accompany them to meet Gabrielle and her son Malocchio in private. The PCs level up to 7, and we proceed to Act 2. In Act 2, the PCs meet Gabrielle and her son in a large but specialized room in her manor. It's practically a museum, decorated with all kinds of arcane talismans and totems, ritualistic paraphernalia, and demonic idols. Go with demonic and satanic-looking imagery, plenty of pentagrams and inverted holy symbols. You could incorporate goat heads and Baphomet and the Cross of Leviathan, stuff like that. Less Lovecraftian stuff, more Satan Begone stuff. Numerous hooded guards stand at the edge of the room, and Gabrielle and her son sit at a table at the very center. There are as many empty seats as there are PCs, and Gabrielle's spirit board and its pointer sit right in front of her. Nothing else occupies the table but a black candle. Oh, and the large hellhound-like monster which the PCs recently defeated sits there, obedient, even domesticated, allowing Malocchio to pet it as it pants and thumps its bandaged tail. Gabrielle, of course, invites the PCs to sit down, and if the PCs look at the spirit board, they note that it's covered with infernal lettering and all kinds of devilish and demonic symbols. It should take a religion check to identify them, especially if the PCs don't already know infernal as a language. When the PCs sit, or at least when they approach, Gabrielle lays her hands on the spirit board's pointer, and everything changes. Time seems to slow down. Every one of the PC's motions seems to proceed as if it were underwater. Things are hazy and wavy, as if viewed from a distance through high heat. And darkness floods the surrounding area, so that the only thing visible is a spotlight that seems to come down from out of nowhere onto the table where Gabrielle and her son and the PCs sit, or at which they stand. This darkness is magical. It doesn't matter if the PCs have dark vision. And even with Devil's Sight, all they see is a dark black expanse that seems to go on forever. At this moment, Gabrielle and her son become immune to all damage and conditions. Their table and the spirit board, too, becomes immune to all damage. If the PCs try to injure either party or damage the table or the spirit board, I would describe them as actually seeming to do something, albeit in slow motion, but then somehow time reverses and they move backwards and everything becomes reassembled and knits back together. You could say that strange flames flicker and bloom from the wounds as they heal, too. This whole time, Gabrielle is moving her hand around the spirit board with the pointer, and as she does, other spotlights appear in the distance, and under each spotlight is something meant to entice the PCs into the dark. An ally that they want to see again. An endangered ally that they want to help. An item that they've always been looking for. This is a moment where you can really play with and embellish PCs' personalities, their interests, and their backstories, put each one in a little spotlight, And the goal is to get the PCs out into the darkness. They could play along and go willingly. You could compel them on pain of saving throw if you wanted to, wisdom save or charisma save. Or you could just give them the option of seeing whether they go into the dark and, after a while, plunge the entire area into darkness anyway. Regardless, the PCs end up plunged into magical darkness for a moment, and then find themselves on the border of hell. For that is where Gabriel Adair, Dark Lord of Invidia, has sent them. And at this point, run Camp Firefield from MCDM's book Where Evil Lives, their book of boss monster layers. This is a really good dungeon to run for this occasion. I would just make a few changes. First, describe the landscape as red and dusty, with very few trees or other plants, and what few trees and plants there are being wiry and scraggly. Say that there are no recognizable constellations in the sky, and that even the stars themselves appear as distant flaring orange coals. The air reeks faintly of brimstone, and there's no end to the perpetual night. Second, I would describe the hobgoblins as looking more devilish, more like fiends, not identifiably hobgoblins. Don't ever use that term. Change all their creature types to fiend, too, to reflect this. And third, and finally, change all the lore, dialogue, and descriptions so that, instead of being a camp of hobgoblins mincing to attack a nearby village, this is a group of devils on the border to hell who have been attracted to the call of Gabriel Adair's spirit board and who are seeking a way to get to our world. Their leader, Blood Lord Varrox, who's the boss monster of this dungeon, is happy to explain all of this as he tries to slay the PCs. He also explains that he's acquired a counterpart to the spirit board's pointer in Gabriel's world. He suggests that somehow it's the key to crossing back. And indeed it is, but the PCs will have to slay Bloodlord Varrox in order to find this out. Once they do, they get to claim all of Varrox's treasure, which is considerable. That's one thing that's pretty cool about where evil lives, is all the bosses have really cool and believable treasure. But as the PCs finish collecting it, and in particular that counterpart to the spirit board's pointer, there's a flash of light, or let's say a flash of hellfire. The PCs reach level 8, and we proceed to Act 3 of this adventure. In Act 3, at level 8, the PCs awaken in Carina, in the city, in a church. According to the clergy who have been caring for them, the PCs wandered in a daze and showed up at the church's doorstep, clutching this weird, infernal-looking spirit board pointer. They've been in a feverish state, muttering things about hell and devils and portals and crossing over. As they awaken, they find that, fortunately, the clergy has not stolen any of their treasure, which they somehow have, or their equipment, and that they've enjoyed the effects of a long rest. You could make this church the site of its own little dungeon or adventure or intrigue, but I wouldn't. I'd use it to let the PCs take a quick breather after a difficult boss fight, get their bearings, and then, as soon as they leave the church and go forth into the street, they are confronted by an imp. A hellish little devilish imp who has a proposition for them. The imp's name is Beelzebub, and he has a deal. He knows that the PCs want to leave Invidia, and he knows that this requires either defeating or otherwise disempowering Gabriel Adair, who alone will allow them to escape. Indeed, if the PCs have already tried escaping, they will note that the area is bordered, the city is bordered even, by Ravenloft mists, so that if they try to go into the mists, they just come back the way they came. It's a standard Ravenloft domain. The imp knows this, and acknowledges this as part of his deal. He offers the PCs a way out, a way to disempower Gabriel. All he asks for, in return, is for one of the PCs to sign a contract. And here's what the contract says. The PC doesn't forfeit their soul or anything like that. It's a little bit more cruel. Whoever signs the contract agrees that at some point in the future, a point not specified in the contract, the imp will visit that PC. When Beelzebub visits the PC, they will inform the PC about some preventable evil. Some preventable evil. A horrible thing that the PC could prevent. And according to the terms of this contract, the PC must do nothing. That's it. At some future date, Beelzebub will specify a horrible thing that the PC could prevent, and the PC will be bound by contract not to do anything. Wicked, right? Devilish, right? And also the sort of thing that a PC could agree to without something so permanent or drastic as giving up their soul. Yes, this is a contract that one of the PCs is intended to accept. Feel free to sweeten the deal. Assuming one of the PCs takes this deal, and insight tests and investigation tests and things like that should reveal that the contract is exactly that, there aren't any other hidden clauses, Beelzebub reveals that if you take the spirit board pointer that the PCs got from the border of hell, and you lay it on Gabriel Adair's original spirit board, you can render her powerless and compel her to obey you. Do that, and you can command her to open the land's borders and let the PCs go. In addition, Beelzebub reveals that right now, Gabriel Adair's mansion is under construction. Or rather, parts of it, new wings are under construction. This means that there's a regular flow of work people going in and out of the mansion, and that the PCs could get into the mansion and find where Gabriel's spirit board is by posing as workers and disguising themselves. So it's a heist. A reverse heist, though, because here the PCs need to break into a place with something, and then find a certain spot to put it. And for the remainder of this act, we're going to run Shard of the Accused, from Keys to the Golden Vault. We're going to make a few changes, of course. First of all, the PCs get this quest from Beelzebub, so just erase all that prologue stuff. And also describe Julon's tomb as if it were a lavishly decorated mansion. Instead of describing excavation and excavation tools, describe construction and construction tools. In particular, describe the giant statue in Area X4 as the statue of a goat-legged devil. A religion check can reveal that it's a statue of Asmodeus, and say that the workmen are constructing the statue rather than chipping away at it. Also, replace the golem in Area X10 with a bone devil. It's more thematically appropriate. And say that the altars in Area X13 are all altars to devils. Zariel, Levistus, Mammon, Belial, those. Also, if any of the doppelgangers reveal their true forms, describe them as looking more fiendish and devilish, like cambions, than looking like traditional doppelgangers. Oh, and don't use the term doppelganger, of course. And of course, replace Aminta, or Aminta, with Gabrielle Adair and her son, Malocchio. Now, in Area X19, say that instead of planning for war or whatever they're supposed to be strategizing about in there, they're just planning for Malocchio's next birthday party. There's also talk of creepy initiations and anointings, and murmurs of the names of devils. And I would emphasize here that Gabrielle and her son both have the status of Dark Lords in the sense that if the PCs just kill them, they're going to resurrect immediately and they're going to be upset. There's no shortage of guards they can summon and devils that they can summon, so this dungeon resists the easy solution of just killing off those two. And finally, I would remove the small voice of warning or whatever at Area X22 and change Relago's ghost to just a table sitting there that has the spirit board and original pointer on it. Now, as soon as any PC places the hellish version of the spirit board pointer on the original spirit board, everything goes black except for a spotlight that shines down on that table, like before. Only this time, as the pointer starts to move, Gabrielle and her son Malocchio both materialize in clouds of hellfire which continue to engulf them before the PCs. They look almost like devils in the firelight, and the pointer begins to move on its own as you roll for initiative. Now here, what the PCs must do is survive for 6 rounds, as at the beginning of each round, the spirit board's pointer selects another letter, one that becomes legible to the PCs as it is selected. So in round 1, it points to the letter A, in round 2, D, in round 3, E, in round 4, R, in round 5, R again, and in round 6, E. A-D-E-R-R-E spells Adair. The spirit board with the new hellish pointer points out the Dark Lord's name, and as it does, at that last letter, Gabrielle and her son are trapped, paralyzed in columns of hellfire, and forced to obey the PC's whims. Before that happens, in the meantime, however, both of Gabrielle and her son have the statistics of cambions. They are immune to all damaging conditions, however, just as they are immune from approaching the spotlight in which the table and the spirit board with this new pointer rests. And once the spirit board with its new pointer has spelled out the Dark Lord's name, and the Dark Lord has been forced to submit to the PC's will, the PCs are free to escape. Or do they want to do something else? Either way, this marks the end of their adventure in Invidia. And that's our Invidia adventure. What do you think? Do you like the idea of taking a quick jaunt to the border of hell? Do you like the idea of treating Gabrielle Adair's spirit board as being something like the box, the puzzle box from Hellraiser? Or do you have other ideas about how to do an Invidia adventure properly? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching as always. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about new videos on this channel. And thanks!